Welcome to the Rooted Remedies podcast.
Thank you.
Um, like I say every time, thank you so much. I just started this, so I still get excited when people say yes. I still get like, oh my God, I get the heebie-jeebies. Um, so for my listeners, please elaborate your kind of origin story health-wise and where you are today with that.
I guess there's two origin stories there because one is my
Yes,
origin story as a journalist, and
correct.
the second
Yes.
would be then, my health journey that I have written about and publicized. So I kind of got into doing journalism after the events of 9/11, and just kind of asking myself the question, why would people do this and not really and being naive enough to ask myself that question in the first place and not being satisfied with the answer from the George W. Bush administration that, well, they hate our freedoms. And so that kind of got me just into researching U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, which led to an intense focus further down the road on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And so I was writing about foreign policy issues for a number of years. Down the road, a long story short, in 2012, my son was born. My wife and I had a son. And so, what during her pregnancy, and then of course after his birth, I was just intensely researching vaccines. And I
Mhm.
wasn't doing it by like, going to the pediatrician. Well, we were in Taiwan at the time. My son was born in Taiwan. My wife is Taiwanese. So I was in Taiwan for this whole entire period where I'm talking about like doing research and then doing journalism. I was in Taiwan. We moved back here in a year, very shortly after he was born in 2013. We moved back to the US. I'm in Michigan.
Okay.
And so there's a number of things that kind of came together at once. One was becoming a father. And so I was researching, I had kind of was applying like research skills I'd obtained doing journalism into researching the topic of vaccines. And so, not going to excuse me, not just accepting like the CDC vaccine information statement says, okay, this is enough. This is sufficient information for us to make a decision. It wasn't like that at all. It was like, for each vaccine, starting with the hepatitis B vaccine, like digging into the literature, like, and to be able to make a decision for myself and not follow the recommendation of anyone else other than, just going to exercise my own judgment.
Mhm.
And so I was just deeply researching the literature for that reason. And then after moving back to the US, several months after moving back here, I had this experience where, um, well, in the weeks before this event, I started having these itchy rashes on my feet, and I didn't understand why that was happening. And then I had it was a migraine, but I had no idea that it was a migraine at the time. It started out, I had some people get the aura in their vision. I had no idea what that was. I'd never heard of that before. And so um, I started having that aura. And we had moved back from Taiwan, and for a while we were living with my parents.
Mhm.
And so I went and I talked to my mom, and I was like, I'm having this weird thing, Mom. Like I feel like this brain fog, and I've got this thing in my vision. It's really weird. And um, that she was kind of just keeping an eye on me for a while, and then after a bit, I started kind of losing cognitive abilities, where
Mhm.
like communication abilities, like I couldn't really express myself, like I could think thoughts,
Yeah, going one speed.
but it was like the language center of my brain was just like anytime I tried to speak the words that were in my mind, like I couldn't speak words, and so my parents became concerned and they drove me to the ER. And there, and then once there, like my entire right arm went numb. I couldn't feel my arm, just like it, and then a pounding, just horrible pounding headache kicked in. Um, and I had no idea what was going on. I was terrified. I thought I must have had a brain tumor or something. I thought it
Mhm.
was good, and I was just freaking out, thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to leave my wife and my son without a husband and a father," and it was terrifying. Because I had no idea that a migraine could be like that. It was the worst. I mean, I always thought a migraine was just like a bad headache. This was
Right.
just way beyond a bad headache. It was just terrifying. Um, and then, um, and then I started having these other symptoms. And I had for a long time in Taiwan, I had gut issues. And so, just basically the doctors would be like, oh, you have IBS. So irritable bowel syndrome is what they would say. And that diagnosis was always kind of meaningless to me because I had done enough research to be able to figure out that, okay, well, IBS is just what they call gut symptoms, that they have no idea what's causing it. So they just have
Right.
this label for it, right? So they call it IBS, but that didn't satisfy me. And then, so I kind of kicked my research into my own health into high gear after that migraine. And then I started having these other symptoms. It started out the rash on my feet, and that started to just like, I'd be itchy rashes everywhere, my abdomen, my arms, legs. I would just have these itchy rashes, hives. Like I could draw like words on myself with my finger. I could just like touch myself, and you'd get these red lines from the hives. And it was miserable. Like, I had in the migraines, I never had a migraine as bad as that first one. But I would get these severe migraines that would like literally put me out for days. It would come on one day and it would take a day or two to recover from it. Like where it would just still be like a pounding headache. I couldn't stand the light. I would have to just stay in my room with the windows, blinds
Yeah,
closed and things,
classic.
light off because I couldn't take the light. It was really debilitating. In addition to the gut symptoms I was having. And so I was doing this research just to try to figure out like, okay, what is causing all these weird symptoms? And is it different things? Am I suffering from different things, or is it all related? And so I came to the conclusion that it was all related, and it was all related to my gut. And I learned of what they call leaky gut, or in the literature, it's also described as intestinal hyperpermeability. And there were just so many studies on this in literature. And of course, I think I first learned about it just from, alternative healthcare practitioners. I'd read blog posts or things like this, but I was never satisfied with just reading some blog posts and accepting that. I wanted to know, okay, first of all, is this thing real? Is leaky gut real? And so I went into the literature, and yes, it's real. And it was completely uncontroversial in the literature. And what kind of really, um, I guess that the crux of the story is that I was going to go to doctors to try to get help with this. And so I established again, kind of had recently moved back to the US from Taiwan. And so I established myself with a primary care physician, a PCP. And I tried to get help from him. And I explained the situation. I explained, well, I think I have leaky gut, and that's what's causing these symptoms. I'm having immune reactions because what happens with leaky gut is that you have uh, absorptional dysfunction, basically. So molecules that you shouldn't be absorbing, that shouldn't be passing through your gut lining, are passing through, and then your immune system is responding to that. Your immune system responds to that. So you're having these immune reactions to food and things. And I had never had any kinds of intolerances for foods, or apart from like I had figured out while I was in Taiwan, again, I had been diagnosed with IBS, and I had figured out that, okay, if I avoid wheat, that really helped with my gut symptoms. But that was kind of as far as I had progressed. And I didn't even really know much about like gluten and things like that. Um, but by the time I was kind of in this position of having diagnosed myself with leaky gut, and then trying to get help from doctors, and so I went in and I told him I think I have leaky gut, and he was just like completely dismissive and condescending. Oh, there's no such thing. This is a bunch of nonsense. Doesn't exist. And then he was just like, you just have food allergies. And I was just like, well, I've never had food allergies. I don't have food allergies. But so I had to go jump through his hoops, and so he did the blood test that came back negative for food allergies. And I said, okay, so why don't you consider my hypothesis of leaky gut? And he was just still very dismissive about that. And so he wanted me to jump through another hoop, which was to send me out of town to an allergist and get the skin prick test. And I had the same kind of conversation with that doctor. I walked into his office and I said, "Well, I'll tell you, I don't think I should be here because I can tell you right now, this isn't a question of food allergies. I have leaky gut. I'm almost certain that what I have is leaky gut." And he said to me, I'll never forget this. He said, "You read a lot on the internet, don't you?" Like he was so condescending and dismissive and insulting to my intelligence.
And
And
he
I
told
just kind of sat there stunned. Like what? So I shouldn't be doing my own research into my own health on the internet? I shouldn't be doing that? That's something to be like, you're mocking me for that? So I said to him, I said, well, yeah, I go to pubmed.gov and research the medical literature.
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I thought it, and I didn't say it out loud. I kind of wish in
You're
hindsight
like,
that I had actually said this out loud, but I thought to myself, you should try it sometime. And if I could repeat that confrontation, I would have said that to him because he was just so arrogant and condescending, and of course, completely wrong. And so he was the same way. Like he heard me say this term leaky gut, and he thought that was just a bunch of pseudoscience nonsense. But of course, it wasn't. Skin prick test, of course, came back all negative for everything they tested. Didn't have food allergies, and so they couldn't explain it. They couldn't explain my symptoms, my hives, everything. They couldn't explain it with their hypothesis of food allergies, and so I went back to my PCP. Oh, and another thing, just another example of that guy's ignorance, the allergist. So as we were leaving, and I was discussing how, my leaky gut hypothesis makes a lot of sense. Like for example, the numbness I would have in my fingers, in my extremities, I would have this numbness. And I think, well, that's a symptom of B12 deficiency, which is
Mm-hmm.
explained by the malabsorption, because it's not just a situation where you're absorbing smaller molecules you shouldn't be absorbing, but um, you're
Deletion.
also not absorbing nutrients that you should be absorbing. So it's this dysfunction of the gut, and so that leads to malabsorption, and so you're not getting the nutrients you need. And so I gave that as an example of this is a symptom that is explainable by leaky gut. I have this malabsorption, I have this tingling in my feeling because of B12 deficiency. And his response to that was, people in America don't get nutrient deficiencies. Like, really? A licensed medical practitioner, a licensed medical professional telling me people in America, I just couldn't believe the level of ignorance
Right.
from both of these guys. And so I went back to my PCP and I said, well, look, see, I told you it's not allergies. Are you going to consider leaky gut now? And he was just like, again, just so dismissive. And then I started explaining, I had learned about one of the problems with gluten for people who, at that time, like non-celiac gluten insensitivity was still kind of like controversial. Like people doubted its existence. And it's like, yes, there was celiac disease, but nobody else, unless you're a celiac patient, you don't have a problem with gluten. And if you think you have a problem with gluten, it's just a myth, and it's just a fad that people eat gluten-free food when they don't have celiac disease. And it's just like people being silly about gluten. And so, of course, I had known better. Because I didn't need any doctor to tell me. Like I was,
You
I
felt
had I had
better.
started I had started doing elimination diets. This was really key, where I would cut out foods and just eat, just basic, vegetables, maybe some meat or something, and like eliminating processed foods and just having like a very basic diet. And I lost a lot of weight during that period. But it's what I had to do. And then you kind of get to a point where, okay, I can at least minimize my symptoms with this basic, almost starvation diet,
Right.
and then reintroducing things and saying, okay, what am I reacting to? And it was almost everything that I was reacting to, and so I figured out that I had to cut out, number one, gluten, but not for me, but it wasn't just the gluten containing grains for me. I had to cut out all grains, corn, rice, everything.
Yes.
Um, and there's a guy, a doctor, Peter Osborne, who
Mm-hmm.
was really helpful in that area, because I didn't understand that, because I thought, well, what these grains don't have gluten, I thought. And so why am I reacting to like rice and corn too? But Dr. Peter Osborne, researching, and I loved his website. It was very helpful, resourceful. And he'd of course give you the links to all the studies and things. And I would, read his articles and then confirm what he's saying by reading the studies for myself. And so what it turned out is that some people, because the proteins and these other grains are so similar, that there's cross reactivity. And so some people can't have the other grains as well, even though they're supposed to be like gluten-free grains, but they have, gluten is a protein. And so the proteins in these other grains are very similar to gluten, and some people react to them. And so that explained that to me. So I had to cut out all grains. I had to cut out dairy, soy, alcohol, and those were the big four for me. But then there would be weird things, like I would notice I was reacting to like celery, and so sometimes there were just odd things that I would seem to react to that kind of puzzled me. And I kind of later, still not certain about some of the things, but I think I had a histamine intolerance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of these things that were just kind of tied and related to each other. But it was the ignorance and the arrogance of the doctors that really struck me. And so in the last time I saw that PCP, When I had gone in to see him, the nurse came in first thing and asked me if I wanted a flu shot, and I declined it because I had actually published a major four-part series of articles exposing the fraud that is the flu shot. And so I had done an incredible amount of research into the flu shot. So of course, of course I was going to decline it when they offered it to me. Um, so anyways, the doctor came in, we had our discussion where I'm like, it's leaky gut, come on. And I was trying to explain to him how gluten, that it actually your gut responds to gluten. There's an enzyme, I think it's called zonulin. I forget. It's been a while since I've reviewed this material, this information, but I was trying to explain how that causes your the tight junctions of your cells. It causes this kind of, that's what causes it contributes to leaky gut. So gluten can be a cause or a contributing factor to leaky gut. Unlike other foods that I was reacting to, like dairy wasn't a root, like it wasn't the cause, it was just a symptom, right? But gluten, particularly, was something that I did have to cut out because it was not just because I was reacting to it, because it was actually helping to contribute to the leaky gut. And I was trying to explain that to him, and he's just like, no, gluten doesn't do that. It's like I could show him the studies, but like he was just so ignorant. And so we kind of, had a heated exchange, and I was like, yes, it does. I can show you the studies. He was again denying leaky gut, and I said, well, okay, I can show you studies. And I said, it's completely uncontroversial in the literature. I've never encountered a study, and the hundred or whatever number of studies I've read on leaky gut, I've never encountered a single one that like questions its existence. It's completely uncontroversial. I said, I can show you a study in the BMJ where the authors describe that leaky gut is a prerequisite factor for 50 different autoimmune diseases. And he just refused to listen to anything I had to say. Like I was just making it all up or something. Like none of this really existed in the literature. And so he kind of stormed out after a while. He lost patience with listening to me insist that yes, it's a real condition, and yes, it's pretty sure this is what I have. And so
Yeah.
he walked out, and then after he walked out, he popped his head back in, and he said, "And by the way, any any husband, father who doesn't get the flu shot is not a good patient." Like he insulted me for not getting the flu shot. And just said I wasn't a good father, and I wasn't a good husband, and I wasn't a good patient because I didn't get the flu shot. And I just like I was sitting on the table, right, with the paper mat on the table, and I like leaped off of it toward him because he was standing in the doorway. And I looked him right, like face to face, looked him right in the eye, and I said, "What did you just say to me?"
Wow.
And he repeated, that anyone who doesn't get a flu shot is not a good patient. And he walked away, and he turned his back on me, and he walked away. He started walking down the hall towards his office, and I walked after him, and I started talking, and I said, "You are so ignorant." And there were other staff members, right, in the office just down the hall, and throughout the hallway. And I started walking after him, and I said, "You are so ignorant." I said, leaky gut is a real condition. It's also known as intestinal hyperpermeability. Go to pubmed.gov and look it up. And then he walked into his office and slammed his door shut. But everyone in the clinic heard me say that to him. And then I walked out, and that was the last time I ever saw that guy. Because he was completely useless.
Yeah. Yes.
And then, so that was the second doctor I had seen who was completely less than useless, I would describe them as. Because, of course, they just wanted to prescribe drugs. Okay, you can take Zyrtec for the rest of your life. You can take an antihistamine for the rest of your life.
Mhm.
That was as far as they were willing to go to help me. And my request was really simple. There was a test I had discovered. It's a simple, you swallow some sugar solution. And it's a urine test. And it
Yeah.
was like $250, $300 or something. And I was kind of poor at the time, but I said, I'll pay for it out of pocket. I just want the test, but they refused to do it. They refused to order it because it wasn't a test that there was a lab that sells the test, but you had to be a physician to order
A
the test.
licensed
So I
physician.
needed a doctor to help me to do that. And so that's all I wanted from them, and they refused. And then so I switched PCPs, and I fortunately found a doctor who was very different. And I had that, I went in very anxious with that because I went in there on my first appointment with him, to, anticipating here, I'm going to telling him that I have leaky gut and he's going to be all rude and condescending to me. And fortunately, he wasn't. He listened to me. He sat and listened to me. And then at the end of the discussion, when I got done, and I'm like just all nervous that he's going to start like mocking me or something, and he was just like, "Yeah, I think you're right. You know what you describe it sounds like leaky gut to me." And he said to me, "But you know a lot more about it than I do." I was amazed. I was just blown away. Oh, wow, this guy's really different. And then he explained that the only thing he knew about it was he had gone to a conference and they had discussed leaky gut at the conference he went to, and that was like the limit of his knowledge about it. So he said to me, here was this doctor who was like the opposite. He wasn't condescending and arrogant. He actually acknowledged that, yes, you know more. You obviously have researched this. You know much more about it than I do. And so
Mhm.
he was like genuinely wanting to help me. And so I asked him, like if he could order that test for me. And so we were on Medicaid at the time, and we had kind of been forced onto Medicaid because of Obamacare due to our just, I had we had quit our jobs in Taiwan, I had come back, living with my parents. And then I had made a decision, like, I'm just going to try to like make a career out of journalism, and because I had been teaching English in Taiwan and kind of doing journalism as a hobby, basically. And I was like, no, this is what I want to do to make a living. And so I need to figure out how am I going to do that. And so we were very poor. And so we had been forced by Obamacare onto Medicaid. And so I explained to him, I said, but of course, Medicaid wouldn't cover the leaky gut test. And so I said, but that's fine. I'll pay for it out of pocket. And so he said, well, I'll have to consult with my legal team on that. I'm not sure if I can order that for you. And so he did. And so the next appointment I had with him, he explained to him, like, I'm sorry, like I've been told that I can't do that. I'm not allowed to
Wow.
accept payment out of pocket from Medicaid patients. That's what he told me.
That's
And
crazy.
then down the road, I had a few appointments with him. So he was the one doctor I found who was actually like helpful. He
Yeah.
listened, he respected me, and he wanted to help me, but he literally couldn't help me because of the system. And he ended up retiring. I didn't see him for very long because he retired shortly after I kind of established him as my PCP. And he told me the last time I saw him, he explained the reason why he was retiring. He said, I can't practice medicine anymore. I can't practice medicine anymore. And he gave me an example of this elderly lady who he had been his patient for a really long time. And she had some condition where she was taking some medication for her condition. And it worked really well for her. It was very effective for her. And it had a really good safety record. It had been on the market for a long time and had a really good safety record. So it was safe, it was effective. And because of some regulatory thing involving the insurance companies, like they were forcing her, the regulatory system was forcing her off of that drug onto some new drug. It was much more experimental. It wasn't on the market for as long. She didn't know whether it was going to be as effective as the drug that she had been treating with, but it was just, so this was the example he gave of like, this should be between me and my patient. We
Correct.
should be the ones deciding what medication she's prescribed. And instead, I've got this bureaucracy like dictating to me how to practice medicine. And
Mhm.
so he said, I can't keep doing it. And so he retired. So those were his words. I can no longer practice medicine. Um, and so it was indicative of just how corrupt and ineffectual the entire medical system is, the
Mhm.
so-called medical system, and just how pharmacentric it is. And it's not about there's no doctor-patient relationship.
No.
So all these experiences were just really eye-opening to me in terms of uh, doctors and the role of doctors. And then, of course, we had other experiences with our pediatrician down the road with vaccines, which is kind of another story. My wife also had health issues, and so I have a whole other story with my wife's health issues dealing with doctors. And so my experience with doctors is they generally um, they can be really good in a lot of areas, of course, and they can be really helpful depending on what the circumstances are. But like when it comes to like uh, diseases,
They
if you
can't.
break a leg or something, doctors are great. But like when it comes to disease, they're really clueless. They're really clueless. And this is obviously I'm generalizing. This isn't the case for all doctors. There's good doctors out there who aren't, or who really do know what they're talking about. But I think your average MD, in my experience, they're arrogant, they're condescending, they're ignorant. It's like they would go through medical school and like that's the end of their education. They're
Yeah.
not curious
I'll
about
share
what
a
the
quick.
science says. They don't do their own research. They don't continue with their education. I mean, this is just my experience.
Right, right. So quickly, just on my end, this was before there were any children in the picture. I was with my husband or husband to be, and so I missed a period. And I was like, that's never happened. Something is wrong. Okay, I'm gonna go to the doctor, which I rarely did, but for me, I knew kids were coming. So I was like, this has to be addressed, you know. So I go see the PCP and she's like, well, you could stand to lose 20, 30 pounds. I'm going to put you on the pill, but you could gain 20 to 30 pounds. And I was like, you, ma'am, are not firing on all pistons. I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you very much. And I went about my way. And subsequently, I found Nourishing Traditions, which hopefully you are aware of. And if not, you can look into it. I introduced raw milk, grass-fed stuff, CSA type situation, and I fixed that situation. The children are here, we're great. But had I kind of taken the blanket statement and prescription and gone down that path, who knows where I would be now? I think there's a lot of we learn what we do in school and then that's it. And then it's individual, right? Every person kind of goes through their phase of cultivating themselves, of learning. One door opens, 600 more open. So yeah, that's just a quick, you are absolutely right. Um, I had very similar experiences with medical professionals, and being on Medicaid, you are kind of tied to the restriction, like you can't do this, you can't send this test because we don't have that diagnosis for you. So segue to and another point I want to make is that my family, we fled a communist country. So it's not beyond me that the government will do anything and everything to its citizens. I feel, and I'm married to an American. I'm American. I was born here, but my husband he's from Colorado, and he's just like, this has been crazy, a crazy ride for him. And I'm like, I'm sorry, these things happen. Um, People get lied to, people get hurt, people get killed, and your government's responsible for it. So how do we keep our children safe, and so that's my question to you. In that experience, you wrote about it, so you kind of were able to metabolize it. How do you transmit to a younger parent, that sense of let's be resilient here? You took the leap of faith to go into journalism, you took that risk. It's obviously been fruitful, hopefully, to the fullest extent that you want it to be. Yeah, so in embracing that, I'm going to be resilient. I'm not going to listen to the noise. I'm not going to prescribe to the information that's curated for me. You end up being countercultural. So how do you face that panorama?
Yeah, okay, that's a really great question. And the key for me was I had to do my own research and educate myself well enough to be able to go in and confront these doctors
Mm.
and to stand my ground and to learn to trust my own judgment. And so after, I described my experience with the PCP and the allergist, and then the one good doctor who was helpless just because of the system. And then after that, I made one more attempt to try to get help from a doctor before I quit that path entirely. And I said, okay, well, I've diagnosed myself. I'm going to treat myself and forget these doctors. And I did. And I was able to, I no longer have migraines. I no longer have the itchy rashes. That my fingers aren't numb all the time anymore. So I was able to, I wouldn't say my gut is cured. I still have gut problems. Um, my gut is a sensitive area for me, but I don't have those like debilitating symptoms anymore. And that's because I've healed my gut to the point where, I'm not reacting anymore to foods. I can eat, I can have soy again. I can have dairy again. I even eat grains again, including wheat, within moderation. So yeah, I've kind of healed myself. And if I had just gone to the doctors and listened to the doctors, I never would have been able to do that. I had to, I had to ignore the doctor. I had to learn to ignore the doctors and to trust my own judgment. which was a challenge. And so the last attempt I made was I actually went to see a gastroenterologist.
Mhm.
I thought, okay, maybe somebody who specializes in the gut will have heard of leaky gut. That was my assumption. I was like, okay, if anyone is gonna, like not be so ignorant and arrogant about it, it'll be a gastroenterologist, I figured. So I tried, but they were just as in the office there, they were just as ignorant. And they denied that I had leaky gut, and they wanted to do this like invasive. They wanted me to swallow barium as a contrast and do the scan, because they felt it was my pancreas or something. Because they were looking at one symptom of like the malabsorption, and they think, oh well, your pancreas isn't producing enough enzymes, and so we're going to give you this contrast. But I was worried about swallowing barium and ingesting that, and so I had this question. I said, well, if I do have leaky gut and then I ingest this metal, this toxic metal,
Right,
like,
right.
what could that possibly do to me? And yeah, and of course, so I was speaking to I didn't speak to the gastroenterologist about that because I couldn't get in touch with him, but I spoke to his nurse, and she was just like, "Well, I know you think you have leaky gut, but we think you have pancreas insufficiency or whatever they called it." And I said, "Well, okay." And I said, "Well, but that would explain, what your hypothesis might explain the malabsorption." But it doesn't explain any of my other symptoms. And I said, I don't understand why you're so reluctant to consider my hypothesis and just order the test I'm asking you to order. Anyways, that was a dead end. They were just the same thing. So I ended up declining. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't, I felt confident enough to ignore their suggestion. Didn't swallow the barium.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, that's it. I'm just gonna deal with this on my own without doctor's help. And that's what I had to learn how to do.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing. It was the same thing with vaccine decisions for us,
Yeah.
where I had done my own research, and this is the key: is there's so much pressure. There was pressure on me with dealing with my leaky gut, but with the vaccine issue, it's just like a whole other level of pressure on parents to just obey,
Correct.
just do what you're told, get the
Right.
damn shots. Like
Mhm.
that's what everyone is telling you. And so the question you ask is a really good one. It really, you have to find the courage and the confidence to trust your own judgment. So you do have to do your own research to do that. There's no escaping that. You can't just like rely on doctors to tell you what to think. You have to do your own research. But
Mhm.
fortunately, we do have the internet. And so when that
Yeah.
guy was like, you research a lot on the internet, don't you? Or you read a lot on the internet. It's like, well, yes, of course I do. And everyone should be doing that. Everyone should be doing their own research. And we have this library at our fingertips. And you can go to pubmed.gov, which is a government-run website, and it's a database of the peer-reviewed medical literature. And very often, that you can read full studies that are not behind a paywall, and the full studies are right there on the website, or there's links to where you can go read them. I mean, sometimes there's a paywall, but you can at least read the abstract.
The
And you just
irony
read
of it all is that it's all there.
it's
That's
all there.
my personal experience is not too different from yours. And in starting this thing, I was like, I'm not gonna face the vaccine topic because it's too much for people. And you're just gonna get the people that are like, okay, this lady is insane. I'm not even gonna try and access the other information that is quite useful, because it does apply to oral health, and oral health is systemic health, and so when you kind of adopt that, okay, that's actually happening. I was like, I'm just not going to go there. We're just going to leave it at that. But it ends every person that I've spoken to, the topic of vaccine comes up, and I'm kind of like, okay, well, why is that happening, first of all? And second of all, how is this even a thing? Because you go to their own websites, their own published websites, peer reviewed, all that stuff. You go there and it's there, or they're not there. And so you're like, okay, the studies don't exist, and the studies that do exist are either buried or hidden, and it's not for the layperson to kind of interpret.
Right.
And on top of that, like another layer of it all, I was like, okay, I can't process this information. I'm just going to go straight to the conclusion.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Right.
copy and paste the conclusion. And the answers are all there. And
Yes.
so,
Well, that's a good point that
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
I could just interject real quick.
Hmm.
Yeah, because you have to kind of learn how to read a study. And so the important thing is, there's you can kind of really skip like the whole, they describe the methods and the steps they do, but you want to read the abstract, you want to read the introduction, and then you want to read the discussion and conclusion, at least. Okay. So
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff might be way over your head, but you can read those kind of more, you know, plain English type of parts of the study. And so you kind of learn how to do that, and you kind of learn how to understand and interpret things for yourself. It's a really important skill to have. Yeah, you don't need to be a scientist. You don't
I
need
don't,
that.
yeah, and
So
so I introduce myself as to people, and I'm just a mom. I'm trying to figure out things, and then it's like, well, no, because if I'm taking the time to look at these things, I'm not just the mom that shows up at the pediatric office and says, okay, what's due now?
right.
The simplest example that I can give is, sunscreen and SPF and all that jazz, and their own websites say, lack insufficient exposure to the sun is a public health crisis. And using sunscreen is problematic because it blocks your ability to absorb. And so I'm just like, it's 2024. How are we still telling people to lather on the SPF and and so just to land it all, I do believe that you used your intuition and you trusted your judgment,
Mm,
and obviously not knowing you, but just observing you now, you use your reason, you use your logical thinking mind. I feel like there's an issue or a detail about survival of the wisest. This is about using your wisdom and using I don't know, I call it intuition. I'm not exactly sure because you obviously are a journalist, so you took the time, you knew how to digest that information. But I find myself, I'm just a stay-at-home mom, and I'm like, what the crap is going on? This is
mm,
insanity. And I want to get through to people. And it's funny because I was obviously thinking about talking to you, and I was like, okay, these are the kind of questions. And I realized that there's no point in trying to flip someone that's never going to be flipped. So I think what I'm trying to say in a weird way is like, you're just trying to find your tribe and build your tribe
mm,
of maybe someone who's on the fence and could benefit from what they, or oh, that would make them think. You're planting seeds, you're going to water them, and you're going to hopefully see them grow. Um, but I'm kind of like, I'm at a loss because I hate to see children who are obviously injured, who are obviously having reactions because they've got behavioral issues, because they've got eczema, because they have speech delays, you name it, all these things that you see happening. Because I have other moms with friends, and I'm just like, I don't know. I get very like overwhelmed. I feel like Cypher in the Matrix. That's like, no, just put me back. I don't want to. I can't. But then I have my children, and so I have a responsibility to them. Who are they going to marry? What is their legacy? What are they going to inherit? And if I don't take the
mm.
time to kind of think, process this out loud, and obviously not take them to the doctor, then do I make sense? I feel like all over the place about it, but there's a responsibility in doing that, and in going and looking at the articles, and just, yeah, staying true to what you've read, what your eyes have just seen. It's
Well,
intense.
I'm glad you brought up intuition because that's a big part of it. I am I have a logical mind. I think logically, but it was a lot of it was also, I had done a lot of research, but it was also just following my gut and just kind of listening to my heart and just kind of trusting my conscience in
Mhm.
essence. And of course it helps to have knowledge on top of that, but like that was kind of the icing on the cake. But it was really just, I followed my gut. It's like, if they were telling me, well, you just have to take Zyrtec for the rest of your life, for example, I just wouldn't accept that. And I was like, okay, in my gut, that doesn't seem right because the symptoms are not, you're just treating the symptoms. And I want to know what the cause is. And so, my gut said that's not the right thing. And I'm always grateful to have Zyrtec because, I could sleep through the night. It was an
Absolutely,
issue because
absolutely.
I was so itchy for so long. But then the Zyrtec started causing me problems. I started having side effects from it. Specifically, I started having these heart palpitations, these premature beats is what it was diagnosed as ultimately. Um, just for being on it so, chronically, because I was so dependent on it to be not itchy, to be able to sleep through the night. Unfortunately, my wife came to the rescue there, as she did with my diet, because she's just this wonderful cook, and she learned how to cook, like without all the allergens, even though I don't have an allergy problem again, but was reacting to things. So
Right.
she learned how to cook like gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, which is, really challenging. But she just was as amazing at that. And then also with my itchiness and my rashes, she did some research and she came up with this spray, and this number one, a lotion and then a spray. And it was just like a peppermint oil, not, essential oil spray. It really worked. And I was able to use the lotion and the spray to wean myself off of the Zyrtec. And
Mm.
eventually, of course, as I mentioned, through dietary changes, health changes, eliminating, this is maybe a good segue into kind of some of the steps I took if you want to discuss it. But, like
Yeah, yeah,
things I did to heal my gut. The biggest thing was just food, just number one, being more aware of the toxins in the food, and just avoiding them. Obviously, we were already like non-GMO, but we went further and started, as much as we could possibly afford it, like buying the organic produce. And there were certain produce that if we couldn't get it organic, either because it just wasn't available or it was just too expensive, we just wouldn't eat those foods. Like tomatoes are an example. Like we couldn't, we had to cut
yeah,
out
yeah.
tomatoes for a while. We just stopped buying them because there were organic varieties, but they were so much more expensive. So we just stopped eating tomatoes for a while, as an example. And so just being aware of the pesticides and the herbicides, and particularly glyphosate. I think glyphosate, which is
Yeah.
the main ingredient in Roundup, which they spray on not only. This is something I had learned that they don't only spray it on GMO crops because of course many crops are genetically engineered to be resistant to the Roundup. But one of the things I learned was that they actually desiccate wheat with Roundup before harvesting. So even though wheat is not GMO,
Right.
right, but it's totally contaminated with Roundup. And so I think that was a big factor in my gut problems. I was just really unaware of. Oh, pardon. Oh, sorry. Let me put my phone on
Oh, no worries.
on mute. Um, Yeah, so I think glyphosate was a huge factor in also in leaky gut because again, gluten can affect your gut permeability. But I don't think that was the major thing. It wasn't because I had eaten gluten my whole life, so it wasn't suddenly like gluten just caused this issue. There were other factors where then gluten maybe was a contributing factor. But I think glyphosate was a huge thing, and, as well as other toxins, pesticides, and there's so many environmental exposures. So but the diet was the biggest thing, I think. In addition to just stress management was another huge thing. Learning how to deal with my stress and anxiety. I was going through a very difficult times in my life. It was very stressful. Financial situation was pretty bad. There was just tons of stress. Being a new father, dealing with the vaccine issue, trying to deal with pediatricians, trying to deal with doctors, dealing with my health issues. I mean, it was just incredibly stressful. And so I had to learn to deal with that and find ways of dealing with it. Because cortisol, the stress
Yeah.
hormone,
Yes.
affects your gut permeability as well. And so these were steps, I just really had to kind of work at it. And so those were some of the things that I did to heal. So yeah, but the doctors had nothing for me. They were just completely unhelpful.
Yeah. I want to share with you what I'm kind of figuring out now is the realm of quantum biology, which is circadian rhythm. So you want to, and this has been huge for me since my son was born in April. So end of summer, I started to catch every sunrise. I started to catch every sunset and kind of reestablish that circadian rhythm. Because what that does, you kind of tell your body during the day, hey, we're going to produce the cortisol, it's daytime. And then when you follow that rhythm at night, when the sun starts to set, you produce the melatonin
Mhm.
and then you sleep deeply. And so I found this neurologist, Dr. Jack Cruz, who I recommend deeply looking into, especially with the leaky gut situation, because it's, I didn't know there was melatonin in your teeth
Mhm.
and in your oral system, and that everything is built upon our systems, our endocrine system. And so the minute your sleep is disrupted, your whole, I call it the conductor is kind of either blindfolded or looking the opposite way, and the symphony's over here, and they're not communicating. So yes, cortisol is a huge thing. The food is a huge obviously a huge aspect. And this, I'm, almost candidly speaking to you, the artificial light at night and blue light is kind of like it's been an aha moment for me, that I just wanted to share. And
Yeah.
so the vaccine was, for me, the vaccine story is a huge wow. Like, I did not expect to be part of that movement.
Hmm.
I did not expect to be part of the homeschooling situation. I know you homeschool your son. I did not. I'm a public school kid, and I thought I didn't know what to think. You don't have those things kind of answered before you have kids, but when you have kids, you're like, oh, I got to define this right now. This has to be chosen. And I'm not going to do the public school route because I'm sure we understand each other in those decisions. Um,
Hmm.
this artificial light at night, blue light EMF situation is my new aha moment. And
Yeah.
I don't have leaky gut, but I'm like, I can understand why a parent would develop leaky gut in this whole stressful situation. And I yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And
Well, I think a lot of people do have leaky gut and they don't know it
yes,
because it's
yes,
not only about gut symptoms. I mean, I would say anyone who has IBS, they should think immediately, okay, forget this label IBS. Probably that's leaky gut.
right.
But anyone with any kind of autoimmune disease should consider you have leaky gut. Again, there was that study in the BMJ. I think it was BMJ. Or no, maybe it was the journal Gut. There's a journal Gut, which might be a BMJ journal. But anyhow, where they said, these researchers said that leaky gut is like a prerequisite condition for at least 50 different autoimmune diseases. So there's that. As far as the vaccines, yeah, I mean, for me, I had expected when I started researching that to find a gap. I was anticipating a gap between what we're told, which I basically considered to be propaganda already, even before I started my deep research, and what I was going to find. But I was not prepared for just like the chasm between what we're told. And so, what the government and the media say science says about vaccines and what the science actually says about vaccines are two completely different things. And every parent needs to understand that. And this is why it's so important to actually go and do your own research and
Mhm.
don't trust what the government says. Don't trust what the media says. Don't trust what your doctor says because they're just getting their information from the CDC or from the media
Yeah.
or from the AMA or the AAP. And they don't do what we do. Most doctors, and you can talk to, doctors like Dr. Paul Thomas,
Yes.
in Oregon, who was persecuted by the medical
I
board
don't
there
think his
for
license has
respect.
been restored, right? I don't think they've.
Nope, he has had to retire. Um, but he's on, he's on a different path now, and he's still helping people, and he's still educating, and he's still being his wonderful self.
Mhm.
He just can't practice medicine anymore. Um, and the reason why was because he was respecting parents' right to informed consent. And so you have doctors like him. I mean, I interviewed him from my book, The War on Informed Consent.
Mm.
Um, and he said, like I went through medical school, I came out of it, practicing medicine the way I was taught. You get very little information on vaccines in medical school. It's basically the same thing you would read in high school textbooks about advancements in healthcare and things, and vaccines are wonderful, and they've saved us from all these diseases, and everyone needs to get them. That's the extent of the education.
Right.
And so he was somebody, like it could explain, like doctors don't get that education, and he was one of those unique individuals who overcame his own confirmation biases because you can imagine as a practicing doctor vaccinating children being resistant to the idea that, well, maybe this is harming them. Maybe instead of helping them, this is harming them. But he was one of those individuals who asked himself that question, raised that hypothesis, and then started researching, doing his own research to try to answer that question for himself, honestly. I mean, he came to the conclusion that yes, what he was doing was actually harming children instead of helping them.
Yeah.
And so he changed his practice and he started respecting parents instead of just pushing the CDC schedule and saying, well, this is what the CDC says, so this is what you should do. he started saying, well, this is what the CDC says, and here's additional information. And so, just being able to empower parents to make their own choice, because it really is the parents ultimately who have to be responsible for that choice. Um, and so he's one of those unique individuals. But point being, you can't just listen to what your doctor says and just do what they say. You really have to think for yourself and do your own research and come to your own conclusions about any of these issues, whether it's whatever the health issue is, and of course, particularly with the vaccines, it's incredibly important. You look at the childhood population, it's incredibly sick. We have a very unhealthy childhood, as we do an adult population, but it's extremely frightening, the poor health among children. We
Yes.
shouldn't be seeing children, we shouldn't be seeing over half the population with chronic disease. This is not right. And this is a failure of the CDC, obviously, and of the entire public health establishment. And so you look at that reality and you think, okay, well, we're supposed to trust these people. We're supposed to trust this establishment. We're
Hmm.
supposed to trust this system that produced this outcome to tell us what's in our children's best interests. So that's just prima facie absurd. So that's the first thing. Get it out of your head that we need to listen to these people
Yeah.
because they don't know what they're talking about. Look at what they produced,
Mm.
right? Look at what the system that these people represent have produced. It's a horrific outcome, and obviously, um, vaccines are a part of that. I don't think this is just undeniable. And so and the other thing, in a way, there's a huge benefit of what happened during COVID and the
Yeah.
lockdown madness and the coerced mass vaccination in game because everyone in the world can see how the government lied.
I don't, you think,
Anyone who's honest
I,
with themselves about what happened, the government lied about the vaccines and their effectiveness. They said that 2 doses would confer durable sterilizing immunity. It was a lie. So if they lied about the COVID vaccines, what's to stop us from questioning, well, are they also lying about every other vaccine? Right? And the answer is yes, they are. What they said about the COVID vaccine, this is no different. It's what they've always done. It's what they've always done. They've always lied about vaccines. And it's just with the COVID vaccine, it was just so in your face.
yeah.
And of course they gaslight us about it now. And so like as though that never happened. But everyone who went through that can remember, unless you're only 4 years old or something right now or younger,
Right.
everyone who was, you know, every adult
I'm
who went
curious.
through this can think back to 2 years ago or 3 years ago and remember what they were saying about the vaccines. Fauci said it. The CDC director said it. Biden said it. The entire public health establishment had this unified message: 2 doses, durable sterilizing immunity, going to confer herd immunity. That's how we're going to end the pandemic. It was a lie.
Yeah.
And
That's
so,
that.
so of course, they're not worthy of our trust. Prima facie, they're not worthy of our trust. So that's why we have to do our own research. We are responsible as parents. We are responsible for the public health of the childhood population. That's up to us because the CDC isn't going to get that job done. Look at what the CDC is responsible. The government health system, the public health establishment, is responsible for this horrific outcome of chronic disease among the childhood population, among the adult population.
Yeah.
This is not an accident. This is a consequence of government policies and government interventions into the market. And so what we really need is a free market in healthcare, and we have nothing resembling a free market whatsoever.
Yeah. I'm afraid, again, because of my the communist background, I don't think we're ever going to get it. I'm not, and I don't mean to be pessimistic. I am actually an optimist, and that's where I think the two have to coexist, right? But I don't know that we're ever going to have that free market. And so what I want to, selfishly perhaps, what I want to do is learn how to navigate the waters and say, okay, this is propaganda. Clearly that's propaganda. That's BS. And I guess to the best of my ability, take care of my loved ones and people that I care about. But it's, you said the piece on COVID. I live in a town where people believe it. They swallow it, and
Yeah.
it is still here. The most tragic event in human history. And I'm just like, I need the rose-colored glasses, I guess. I need to drink the Kool-Aid because otherwise I will have no friends. I will have no, you know. Um, you're absolutely right. Um, I hear it in my heart. I read the same things and I'm just like, okay, what do we do now? Do you even bother trying to communicate with that friend that is still drinking the Kool-Aid? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, that's the thing. Imagine the cognitive dissonance that requires, well, it's interesting. There was a poll. I had written an article about this some time ago because I had read a poll showing a good thing that people one consequence of everything that has happened is there's less trust in the CDC. This is
Hmm.
a good thing because of course the CDC isn't worthy of our trust. So it's a good thing that people increasingly recognize that fact. But they broke it down by political affiliation. And so among Democrats,
Yeah.
uniquely, there was actually more trust in the CDC
How did the hippies get
after
involved?
everything that happened than pre-COVID. And so when I saw that, I was just dumbfounded. Like, how could you possibly trust the CDC now more than you did before? Because like pre-COVID, like this was one of the big developments was that like pre-COVID, I was speaking out against the public vaccine policy for years before COVID. And it was like if you criticize public vaccine policy, it's like you're a tinfoil hat wearing lunatic. Like it's just unheard of. Whereas post COVID, now it's a part of the mainstream discourse. This question of like, well, is the CDC credible? It's gone mainstream like that.
Oh
That's
God.
it's part of the mainstream discourse now,
Yeah.
and so that's great. We need to be having that discussion. Um, but among Democrats specifically, it's like there's just this cognitive dissonance that because everyone knows they were lied to, and so to not like deal with that, it's like they bury that and they still continue to trust the CDC even after the CDC like repeatedly lied, and not just about the effectiveness of the vaccines, about practically everything
All of
related.
it. All of it. Yeah. No.
Um, and so I have a hard time getting into their heads. Like, okay, so deep down, that they lied, and yet you continue to trust them. And it's just like this cognitive dissonance that they must
I've
have.
even become wary of over-the-counter medications. I'm like, well, there's no recourse. This is common over-the-counter stuff. It's so problematic. Everything is problematic. These people aren't getting paid in vaccine court. If you're a normal layperson and you have an injury, you're not going to see any sort of, and that's the least of it. If you lose a child or if, the worst case scenario, what do I care if I win in court a case worth millions of dollars? I mean, yes, they prevent it from happening to other people because they changed their policy, but I find that I call it the seven-headed hydra. I find that it just gets bigger and bigger, and people are just more like, we're not going to look at the elephant in the room. And I don't know. There's multiple layers happening here that I tried to say they co-opted the hippies, and I'm like, what? I say it with my husband all the time. How did the party of the hippies and the don't trust the government become? You have to listen to everything that is being told of you, and I get frustrated because you know, well, now both parties suck. No, they've always sucked. And you don't get to walk away with that. That's what I've been trying to say from the beginning. No, I feel like there has to be a process of admitting that you drank the Kool-Aid. And so I
Right.
try to stay classy and I try, that's your journey to go on, but at the same time, I hate going to city council meetings. I want to poke my eyeballs out because it is literal bureaucracy and just discussion and just recording of minutes and nothing is actually said and nothing is ever done. And so, where I live in Colorado, it's like we vote against a measure or for a measure, and then city council turns around and just go ahead and does the opposite of what the people voted for. So I, I imagine that at a government level, it must be 10 times, 100 times more inefficient in terms of, okay, let's get this ballot post or this process voted on or let's make these decisions. It must be terrible. It must be the worst. So I know I'm doing another Matrix reference, but I feel like I'm at the point where, he comes out of the bubble but I still have, I've always had that background from the communist family that's like, listen, pay attention, like don't do that, don't do this, notice this, pay attention, but to your point, I remember that day my mom was like, three buildings, two planes, hello. And
Yeah.
that was me at dinner. I was like, oh yeah, okay, all right. So I try I get very like, I need to bring it down because I want to share the pieces of wisdom. I want to share, connect to your intuition because I can't see it getting any better. I feel this urgent sense of timing and I don't know where it's coming from. And maybe it's because I have younger children that I want to see them. I want them to grow up in a world that's better than what it is now.
Yes.
Maybe that's and maybe that's the best I can hope for. And I don't know. Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that drives me, and I always have been that way. Even before I was a father, that was kind of, concerned about Palestinian children, Israeli children,
Yeah.
children in other, Iraqi children. I was speaking out against Iraq war. It was one of the first things I ever did, in terms of activism in writing journalism. Um, but obviously becoming a father just escalated that a thousandfold, and just my sense of purpose
Yeah.
of just, yeah, we need to create a better world for our children and future generations of humanity. And it really is up to us. Government's not going to get the job done. Government's the problem, not the solution. So it's really up to us. And to, yeah, and how do we navigate this system that exists? And hopefully in time we will change it to the point. I do think at some point in the future, civilized humanity will look back on our present era, and number one, they'll recognize the barbarism of coerced mass vaccination, which is what we have. We have a system of coerced mass vaccination. And they'll also recognize the barbarism of the institution of statehood, I believe,
Hmm.
the institution of statehood itself, because um, so for me, I don't like labels, but I consider myself a libertarian in as much as I believe in the principle of non-aggression, which is just a basic principle of liberty. Everyone has a right to do whatever they please as long as they don't infringe on the equal rights of others. It's the
Mhm.
non-aggression principle. So it's a basic principle to follow and to adhere to, and if you follow that through to its logical conclusion on whatever issue, um, that leads to me, that leads to the corollary that the institution of statehood is an archaic institution. It should be eventually abolished. We shouldn't have these entities, these political entities, because if you think about it, they are grounded in the idea that the use of force is required to obtain ends. And the use of force to coerce people into doing things against their will.
Mm,
This is the purpose of the government in term. And I'm not against government. Businesses have a form of government. Our household has a form of government. We have house rules and things. So I'm not against government, but I'm against government in as much as it refers to the institution of statehood. And so I do believe, that someday I think it's possible that civilized humanity, that we will become civilized and we will have free markets and we will have civilization. And they will look back at our present era, and they're going to consider us to be barbarians, essentially. So I am optimistic in that sense. Not going to happen in our lifetime.
okay.
So the question is, until we get there, how do we navigate this, and how do we try to influence future events in a way that we can make that reality at some point in the future? And so that's kind of that's my driving purpose. That
That's why you
long after I'm
homeschool.
gone, long after I'm gone, I want to have like contributed to a legacy of civilization.
Hmm, interesting.
I'm on a civilizing mission.
Okay, so parting words of wisdom, civilized. What would you say if you just had the ear of new parents, um, who are trying to navigate all this I mean, even it's crazy because even Google is like the first 10 things are one thing, and then the next. Anyways, you understand where I'm coming from.
Mhm.
Yeah, if we had that mom that we want to flip, we had her full attention, that we want to build a bridge with, that we want to show her there's another way of doing things. Um, and I want to also add, I don't try to, I try not to be fear-based. I try to stay practical. Okay, this is the hurricane. You have to put the plywood on. You have to, get sandbags, but prepared. But don't deny that there's a hurricane coming. So what would you say to the mother that you had some time with her alone or a dad, in an angle that's like exciting for the future, if that makes sense? Because I'm actually, as much as the state that I live in tries to inch towards banning homeschool or, defining a student and therefore incorporating them into the CDC schedule that they have to follow. Like that's their roundabout way of doing it in my state. I'm actually hopeful because I have options, or at least I feel like I'm creating my options, right?
Right.
Um, so yeah, what could we say? And again, bring in anything you want to bring because I know you're doing the war, journaling what's going on with Israel and Palestine, and I know that there's a lot to be pessimistic about. But I still feel, for whatever reason, we had our kids, so it's important to stay positive. It's important to give them that healthy, warm environment. So yes, what would you say to the mom, the new mom or the new dad?
Well, it's a self-evident truth that we as parents are responsible for our children's health, and we need to do what's in their best interest. And so this whole idea of pro versus anti-vaccine is not the issue. That they use this language, the derogatory label anti-vaxxer and so on, to frame it that way. But that's not the issue at all. The issue is there's no necessarily, it's not everyone should get vaccinated, or everyone shouldn't get vaccinated. It's an individual choice. And this is not only true for vaccines, for any healthcare or medical intervention.
Right.
It's an individual choice. And the answer is different depending on the individual. You can't have this, like, you have this bureaucracy that is saying, okay, this is the right decision for the entire childhood population. That's ludicrous on its face. It's prima facie absurd. It's a logical impossibility for bureaucrats with no knowledge of the individual to be able to determine what's in that individual's best interest. It's a logical impossibility. No bureaucrat in Washington or state capitol has the knowledge of the individual child necessary to be able to conduct a meaningful risk-benefit analysis for that individual child. Only the parents, working perhaps in consultation with a doctor who knows the child, who sees the child, is
Mhm.
familiar with the child and its health condition. Those are the only parties who have the knowledge necessary to be able to make that individual risk-benefit analysis. And so it comes down to the doctor-patient relationship. The state has no business being involved in that decision, period. Period. And so it's not about pro versus anti-vaccine. It's about being pro-health and pro-informed choice and pro-right to informed consent. And this is the problem. So we have this government system that systematically violates. Public vaccine policy results in the systematic violation of the right to informed consent. Whether it's because people are being lied to about vaccines and they're being lied to about the safety and effectiveness of vaccines because it's all propaganda. And here's a question to ask yourself. Look at what happened with the COVID vaccines and the CDC and its claims. Like, it's claimed that natural immunity is inferior to the COVID vaccines, and on and on and on with all these lies. Okay, so the question is, there's a simple question that I have that I would like to put to people to get them to think in a critical way about what the CDC's mission is and who the CDC works for. It's simple. So was the CDC, what was it doing? Was the CDC providing information about COVID vaccines in order for people to make their own informed choice about whether or not to get that shot? Or was the CDC maintaining a policy of achieving a high vaccination rate? Those are two different goals.
Right.
Which was the CDC doing? The latter. It wasn't doing the former. Well, that tells you everything you need to know. The CDC is not interested in providing, the government is not interested and providing people with the information they need to know to be able to make an informed choice. It has a policy goal, and it's going to achieve that goal. How does it achieve the goal of achieving a high vaccination rate? By lying to people, lying about the safety, lying about the effectiveness, not telling the truth about what the science says, and pretending to speak for science. You have Anthony Fauci. I am the science. Of course, the proclaimed benefits of the lockdowns never manifested in the data. The same as the proclaimed benefit of the vaccine never manifested in the data. So that's a question I think people need to see. And I think if you look honestly and answer that question honestly, people can see that, yeah, the CDC doesn't serve public health. They're not in the business of public health. They're in the business of serving the pharmaceutical industry. This is what the government does. It serves big industries. This is why we have a situation where half the childhood, over half the childhood population is chronically ill, incredibly sick adult population as well. People are not healthy in America.
Yeah.
Except, but increasingly people are taking their health into their own hands, and learning on their own. You brought up the light issue. I've been kind of more recently educated about, like the importance of getting infrared light early in the morning. I have a brother actually who has studied that quite intently, and he's been
Oh,
educating me about the importance of light. And of course, I had always known about, you need it for vitamin D and things, but in terms of your circadian rhythm, I wasn't aware of like the importance of infrared, and especially like getting it early in the morning. And then, of course, I had known about like blue light, and I've used software on my computer to reduce blue light from my computer. I actually have a pair of blue light
cool.
blocking glasses here that just kind of clip onto my glasses so I can wear those at night. But it was kind of more recently that I've learned about that. And so, but there is kind of a growing awareness. There is kind of a growing movement, I think, of people who are just taking health in their own hands, and learning to trust your own intuition, learning to listen to your gut, and don't disregard when you have that little voice like screaming something, listen to that voice. And then do your own research to the extent that's required for you to be able to make confident choices and to be confident in your decisions, and just learn to listen to your own judgment. I mean, this is the best advice that I could possibly give to parents, I think, to anyone out there who's struggling with this issue, and because it is to navigate the system. It is incredibly difficult. It is a challenge as a parent.
Yes.
And to me, the key was just learning to be able to trust my own judgment,
Yeah.
and to not be afraid to have those confrontational, to not to have to not be afraid to confront doctors, licensed medical professionals. Just stand your ground.
Mm.
That's I think the key, to just stand your ground.
I thought the story, I naively thought the story for me ended at, well, okay, I won't vaccinate them. They're going to be great for forever. And with the whole blue light and EMF situation, now I'm like, oh, this is really problematic, because I know every kid is being sent home with a Chromebook. And that's
Hmm.
problematic for many reasons, right? I mean, from just the state surveilling you, that perspective, but
Yeah.
also like there's a physical thing emitting the frequencies that's harmful to you, and so that's only going to get more intense. And
Yeah.
so I feel like I said earlier, I feel like I have had this red pill moment with the vaccines, with public school education, and now I'm like, oh, this EMF situation and blue light is the next, has been for me. And so definitely look
Yeah.
into it. um yeah, if it's at 54% or so of childhood chronic illness, it's going to be way worse than that. And I think
That
that's
was
where,
2011.
oh wow, that's right. Yeah.
That was 2011. So it's only gotten worse since then. Yeah.
And I can't remember the mathematician from MIT, but I think it was MIT, that she's like 1 in 2 children will have autism by 2030.
Stephanie Seneff, I believe you're referring to. Yeah.
Okay, okay. How do we accept that? I find really, I'm personally, so my approach has been, okay, I'm just going to be more radically human. And if that means going and getting more sunlight and eating a certain way, the raw dairy, all that jazz, the sauerkraut. If that's my approach, I'm going to commit to that approach because that's my voice telling me just be more radically human. For whatever reason, that's what they're trying to impact, right? That humanity in us. And oh my God, I lost the point. So I just, yeah, that radical humanity but I can't help but feel that not only do I have to be a mom of a young person, I have to be a scientist and look through all the papers, and I have to be, I have to go out and provide for these children, and I have to make sure that my friends know these things, and so I in the last, I kid you not, 2 months, I might have read 20 to 30 books and just sat there, speed reading, and my mom's reading another books, and we're just like, this whole blue light thing is huge. It's huge. And so intuitively, I know that homeschooling is the way to go. And I'm into
Yeah.
my kids are young, they're 2 and a baby. So I've got time in terms of, being able to set that up. I'm curious for you and your homeschooling journey, how is that going? Are you excited? Like, because that's another thing. I know you see the fruits because your child's older, right? Like 12, 11, or 12?
He's 11 now, yeah.
Yeah. I know you're already seeing the fruits of that labor. I have no doubt in my mind. Number one, because obviously you're his parent, but number two, because when you put in that time and that dedication, you can already see the difference with a public school kid. And I say that hurt because I have family members that I love that are going to public school, and I'm just like, what's wrong with you, kid? So yeah, how's it going for you? How are you feeling that? Where are you at?
Well, it's a challenge. Like you said, as parents, we're juggling a lot, trying to make a living, trying to navigate the system, all that, doing our own research. So it's a challenge, but we're taking on the
Go
challenge,
for it.
and
Yeah.
it's great. I'm just happy with where he's at. He's just so smart.
Wonderful. That's it. Yeah, I
You know,
love
and homeschooling really gives us an opportunity to really just kind of let him explore his interests and to encourage, since the beginning of last year, he's been really into chess.
it.
And so last week we were down in Lansing at a big chess tournament down there. You wanted to participate. So we were able to just, I took a day off work, took off the Friday, and we spent the weekend, a 3-day weekend down there. Just encouraging him in his interests and letting him explore. I think it's great. And it's the same thing with, his curriculum. Um, we kind of let him, obviously there's certain curriculum that he has to do it. There's no getting out of it, whether, he's into it or not. But it's kind of like he kind of prioritize his own thing. Like he seems to enjoy math. I always hated math, but my son seems to enjoy it. And so it's kind of like, he just kind of excels in certain areas. And of course, the biggest area he excels in is reading. I mean, he's really easy to teach because he's been literate since he was quite young, and he's very advanced in his reading skill level. I mean, he reads at like a high school level.
Cool.
And so or early high school level. So he kind of is able to teach himself, and this is one of the great things, like I give him, we have this history book. I sent an email, I discussed this in one of my newsletters in recent weeks, how the history books, we just got done doing the Civil War. There was a chapter on what they call the Civil War, which wasn't a civil war by definition. It wasn't a civil war. Um, and so, we kind of went through it, and they had the usual spiel about how, about how Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation, freed the
Yeah.
slaves. And it was interesting because they had a paragraph where they actually described it in this text, two things that it didn't do. One was to actually free the slaves.
Right. Hello.
But then later on in the book, like he asked questions, and the assumption of the question was that that document freed the slaves. And so, my son is able to like see this contradiction. So there's a self-contradiction right within the text. And so we discussed those types of things. And then he was pointing it out like throughout the text, was like how they're contradicting themselves and how that doesn't make sense. Like on one hand saying that, that it freed the slaves, but then later there was a constitutional amendment that freed the slaves. So how can both be true? If the so like he's got this critical thinking ability where he can see these self-contradictions, and draw his own conclusions about it. And so we discuss it. And then we also, looked at we just Googled Lincoln's inaugural address. What did he say in his inaugural address?
From
And
the
he taught,
pudding, yeah.
the whole thrust of his inaugural address was um, to satisfy the southern states and to say to them, I neither have the authority nor the intent to end the institution of slavery. So you guys have nothing to fear. And if you look at the Emancipation Proclamation, so this is one of the documents, just sit down and actually read it, see what it actually said. What it was a propaganda document, and it said to the southern states, well, if you surrender now, you can keep your slaves. And that was the other point that the text actually admitted, that the Emancipation Proclamation didn't do. That was the other thing. It also didn't free slaves in the northern states, because there were slave states in the North as well that remained in the Union. And so it was. So, anyways, we discuss these things. We assign, extracurricular type of things that we do. Googling the inaugural address, which of course they don't mention. So I don't know. For me, it's fun. It's fun to see him being able to think critically and to think for himself, and to not be duped by all the propaganda that I was duped by when
Oh
I
yeah.
was in school. Because I believed all that stuff. Emancipation Proclamation. Oh, that's the thing that freed the slaves. Like that's what we were taught.
Right.
And so it's good. And then we have different textbooks, in addition to that one that we're using that kind of presents kind of more traditional. It's generally good, but it has these moments of just like pure propaganda in it. But of course, we have additional textbooks that teach history from kind of a more liberty focused historical truth type of perspective. And so it's fun, I get to help him learn to think critically and to learn to recognize when he's being lied to, which is something that we never learned. We never learned how to do that in the government school system because, of course, well, it's the government school system. And of course, the government school system wants to indoctrinate you in the belief that we need the government, that the government is benevolent,
Yep,
that
we're
we
the good
need the
guys.
government to take care of us.
Mhm.
And so that's the indoctrination system. And so it's just really I had to de-indoctrinate myself from that. But with my son, he has an advantage because he's not going to be indoctrinated into that system in the first place. So, and even if
I
at some
also,
point in the future, maybe he would go to a public school or go to college or whatever, but he'll be prepared for that. And he'll have the critical thinking skills he needs to be able to navigate that and survive it without coming away completely brainwashed.
yeah, I think the public school system is so interesting, to keep it polite, I guess. You have, I think Americans overall we work very hard, right? We work a long time, very few days of vacation, and so we don't get to travel as much. And so these ingredients that are banned in other countries are allowed here. Public discourse, and I mean, I include myself, like public discourse is very plain and don't question anything and nothing. It's like almost non-reactive. It's like, well, I can't. I've got to focus on work and I've got to focus on my problems. And yeah, so I think you're giving him a great tool in life to be able to judge and to say and discern, that power of discernment. Um my hope is that he continues doing that and that it's great for him and that many more people get to homeschool. And it is, very similar to the health topic. It is a matter of using your intuition and what I call, not what I call, but human ingenuity. We're at the top of the food pyramid because we figured out a few things. I think we could continue to stay um, on top of all of these, ahead of the hydra, ahead of the hurricane. I think we can because of that ingenuity. So, yes.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. And that's why I think there is reason for optimism for the
Yeah.
future because there's parents like us doing the research, thinking for ourselves, and it really is kind of a movement. There is kind of an awakening happening in terms of all of these issues. The health issues, the knowledge of EMF radiation, the blue light thing, the vaccine thing, the poisons in our food, all of this, and it's all important to be aware of all of these aspects. And to once we learn this knowledge, and this is kind of what I did, because like learning about the vaccine issue, doing my own research, I got to a point where I was like, okay, I can't have this knowledge because I did it for myself. It was for
Right.
own personal reasons. But and I was writing about foreign policy issues, economics, things like that. But I came to a point where I was like, okay, I can't have this knowledge and not write about it. I can't not speak out publicly against public vaccine policies. I can't not do it. I was just compelled because of what I had learned doing research for myself to make choices as a parent. And that's, I think it's critical. Like we need to be having these conversations as awkward as they can be. I know what you're talking about, in terms of just like, there's other people who are just, they swallow it all hook, line, and sinker, and they do what they're told. And it can be really challenging. And like you said, you also have to identify the people, like you're never going to change their minds no matter what. That's really important. There's no
Yeah.
point in trying. If you can recognize that, there's no point in beating yourself up over not getting through to somebody. But there are also those individuals who are kind of more open-minded. They might have a completely different point of view than you, but they're at least willing to have that conversation or to hear some contrary information without getting offended or upset. And so if you can just kind of discern the character of the person you're speaking with, I think it's really important that as long as the person is reachable, that we're not afraid to have discussions about important issues. I mean, we have to. How can we go through life not talking about the most important things? So we have to have these conversations.
Self-admittedly, during COVID, I was like, oh boy. And I think because of where I live, I was like, I kept to myself. I'm not very into social media anyways, but I definitely was reserved in my opinions. But it was after having kids that I was like, yeah, I will not be quiet because again, who are my children going to marry? And I know that's a very surface level concept, but it is the truth. Who are they going to be friends with? I want them to have equals, in terms of of how they think and how they were raised and their views on life. And so here I am. Here I am
Yeah.
because having the uncomfortable conversation and I was going to the state capitol before I had kids. So I was willing to do that part. But then I was like, oh, this is a waste of my time.
Yeah.
It really is. It really is. And so I kind of went in, I had my kids, and now that's kind of been the centerpiece of my focus. I'll just do my best to have the healthiest children and
We build our own institutions,
yeah,
build our
yeah,
own systems, our own methods. And we don't need the government school system. We can homeschool. Things like I think this is really important. I appreciate what you're saying about being able to go into town halls and go to the Capitol or whatever and being politically engaged to that extent. But also at the same time, recognizing that there is a level of futility in that. And we just kind of need to develop our alternative systems and just support each other. That's another, really important to have networking. And like you said, you just described it earlier, it's just finding your tribe
yes,
and
yes.
finding other like-minded people, and just kind of creating your own sense of community and support network. I think that's really important.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank
Sure.
you.
Yeah.
um,
Fun. Enjoy the
yeah,
conversation. Thank
yes,
you.
yes. Thank you so much. And best of luck in everything, your homeschooling, and look into Dr. Jack Cruz. He's got a Patreon that's $5 a month. It'll be the best $5 you have ever spent because he does the hyperlinks to the studies. And he's a little crass in his delivery, but I think it's because he's just so sick of having to be politically correct. And there's yeah, he reminds me a lot of, my dad. Like he's very OCD, and then when his point is not getting across, that's when he kind of cuts and is like, listen to me. But so keep that in mind. It's awesome information. And yeah, thank you again for your time. I let it be repeated, and I can't wait to see the ripple effect from that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.